Eclair's Reading Room is proud to present Rose Weasley and the Unfortunate Son of a Lunatic by Danni Merlia, a fanfiction novel inspired by K Rowling's Harry Potter series. Disclaimer: Rose Weasley and the Unfortunate Son of a Lunatic stands alone from and in no way follows the plot, design, or overall structure of K Rowling's Cursed Child. This chapter has been split to benefit your listening experience. Half 2 will be posted soon after. Chapter 1: The Trip Between 9 and 10. It had taken 11 years. 11 very long years. But the waiting was almost over. Rose Weasley, a girl who carries a mane of strawberry curls on her shoulders, presently haloed around her round freckled face, laid in bed that night, wide awake in the dark, tapping her finger against her wrist, thinking about what soon is to come. Her Uncle Harry was a very kind man, very humble despite his involuntary fame, for he was known throughout the wizarding world as a hero. Yes, Rose was a witch, who lived in a family all blessed with magic. But the community of magical people were forced to hide their powers from the outside world in fear of prosecution. 36 years ago, there was a wizard. A malevolent, dark wizard who was hell-bent on power and attempted overthrowing the Ministry of Magic, the magical government. His name for years was feared to even be uttered in the quietest manner. He called himself Voldemort. But his reign of terror, of killing, was seemingly over when he had attempted to murder an innocent child, a baby who was prophesied to one day destroy him. This baby was Harry. Harry's parents were killed in the attack of Godric's Hollow, Halloween night, 1981. But due to the power of a mother's love and the sacrifice of her own life, little Harry survived the killing curse, which rebounded, destroying Voldemort instead. The child emerged from his demolished home in the arms of a giant. The boy not only received a life of trauma, unwanted attention, and a world without loving parents, but he gained a scar on his forehead, a gash the shape of a lightning bolt. However, the entire wizarding world celebrated that night, and gave little Harry Potter the title of the boy who lived. That would have been an excellent end to the story. Unfortunately, unlike everyone had thought, Voldemort had not died. He returned more powerful and more terrible than ever before, 13 years later. But again, through much pain, much sacrifice. Yes, sacrifice. Harry again defeated Voldemort. This time, he did not do it alone. Friends, mentors, teachers, and leaders stood by him. 2 of these friends, of Harry's best friends, were named Ron and Hermione. And that is who Rose was. She was the daughter of Ron and Hermione, a witch and a wizard who had second-handedly defeated Voldemort. Both her mother and father had worked in the Ministry of Magic after that, both with high positions. Presently, her mother works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and her father worked as an Auror, a dark wizard catcher, before quitting to help his brother run a popular joke shop. In 10 hours' time, Rose would be leaving to go to a place most Muggle children called a prison, but of which the sons and daughters of wizards dreamed of going. School. It was a thrilling thing to be accepted to the school. Rose had been alive for 11 years and had not lived a day in which the thought of a present tomorrow had not crossed her mind. Atop a mountain, across a lake, and through a forest, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry resided. This enchanted castle was known to be the best school in Britain. The best in the world, she would argue, by the mere stories of the place. At this palace was where the final battle between darkness and light had taken place. The Battle of Hogwarts, when Harry faced Voldemort and destroyed him for the last time. The end of the Second Wizarding War only increased the school's popularity. There was now a small museum dedicated to the Wizarding Wars, Voldemort, and Harry Potter inside the walls of Hogwarts to be visited at will by admiring students. It may be slightly awkward for Rose to be seeing a museum dedicated to a man she remembered showing up to her 6th birthday party dressed as a unicorn because Professor Hagrid had run away and couldn't make it. She, of course, had known that he wasn't a real unicorn, and found the humor of Harry's frolicking to be much preferred over the magical beast anyway. He was asked to many children's birthday parties after that. She was looking forward to laughing at the plaque describing her uncle's heroism. He deserved it, of course, but she anticipated making fun of him. Rose was attending Hogwarts as a first year tomorrow. Nearly all of her family, not including the Granger grandparents who had no magic, had once attended the school and were nearly all sorted into Gryffindor House. Hogwarts had 4 houses in which the students were separated to ensure a safe and dynamic learning experience for each student. These houses, were Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. During the first year, the students were sorted into one of these 4 houses, where they would spend the next 6 years of their life. This was a frightening prospect for any first-time student, which would include Rose. What if she wasn't sorted into Gryffindor as most of her cousins had been? What if it became her turn to be sorted and they found that she wasn't fit for any of the houses and had to go home? What if she made an enemy on the way to Hogwarts, was sorted into their house and forced to share a dorm? What if she wasn't smart enough to be Ravenclaw, brave enough to be in Gryffindor, patient and loyal enough to be in Hufflepuff, or cunning enough to be in Slytherin? What if she was placed in the wrong house and failed every exam because of it? What if she made no friends where she was? The questions above had been asked by each of her cousins during their dawn, but strangely enough, they were not fears of Rose. At least, not outwardly. She wasn't afraid. Rose Weasley felt peace about being sorted, but at the same time felt sick. She had this gut-wrenching pain in her stomach that stretched to her mind and all the way to the sorting ceremony, no further. So, despite the peculiar calm she had for herself, she was dreading it? That didn't make any sense to her. Was the feeling even for herself? Rose had already visited Diagon Alley, a wizarding market square, and brought her books, uniform, a plethora of other things she needed for school, but most importantly, she bought her magic wand. Her wand was made of ash wood and had a unicorn tail hair as its core, and measured 10.5 inches in length. The slightly darker than beige wood twisted down the handle in a messy braid and spiraled over a marble-like knot of wood at the bottom of her grip. This was the magical artifact that she was most excited about owning. Rose had been warned by her mother not to do any magic with it before school because if the spell worked, she could get into trouble by the Ministry for underage magic. Any witch or wizard under the age of 17 were minors, and therefore not permitted to perform wand-held spells outside of school, cast any magic, with or without a wand, in the presence of a non-magic person, so-called a muggle. Also, you were not permitted to purchase 90% of the merchandise sold at apothecaries, a wand, or a broomstick without a legal guardian's permission. If you were under 17, you were technically not allowed to fly on a broom without an adult supervision, but nobody followed that law, nor did the Ministry see it important enough to be enforced. Of course, Rose had done magic before without a wand, but couldn't control what she did. One time in particular, she had turned Harry Potter's son, her cousin, James's hair, a bright pink because he was picking fun at her red hair. He still made fun of her sometimes, but now called her Red rather than Carrot. Harry had laughed himself red as neither he nor his wife, Ginny, were able to extract the colour from his usually auburn curls. Both parents agreed that he deserved what he had gotten, as his mother's hair was red itself. James led a recreational Quidditch team of a ragtag band of boys from the neighbourhood, and finally understood how it felt to be teased for something you can't control. Rose wrote this incident very explicitly in her diary, and visited it whenever James pissed her off, which was often. Though she respected her mom, she had tried to do magic with her wand anyway when she was at the Potter's house with her cousin Albus, the second son of Harry, who she got on better with. They had been on Owl's bed with their heads together as she dared to emit sparks from the end of her wand, which tingled in her fingers. Perhaps it was fortunate that her Aunt Jenny had entered the room to announce lunch before Rose could try a more powerful spell, or else she would have received a much more severe letter from the Ministry of Magic stating that if any more magic was detected from her wand outside the confines of school, she would be suspended from it until the start of term. Rose had slept with her wand next to her since the day they bought it, and cleaned it at least twice a day, though it couldn't get any shinier. Her trunk of books, clothes, telescope, cauldron, writing materials, and many other things she needed for Hogwarts classes were sitting at the foot of her bed, locked and ready to go. She had laid out her school uniform over her protruding dresser drawer to be ready when she had to wear it tomorrow on the train. The students at Hogwarts took a train to get there every year, the Hogwarts Express is what it was called, and left from platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station on September 1st at 11 o'clock every year. Rose tossed and turned but couldn't get to sleep. Her mattress wasn't lumpy. She had checked it for peas, which her little brother had actually hid under her mattress one Christmas, and she was shocked to have noticed were there. Was excitement the reason she couldn't get to sleep? It wasn't anything like Christmas Eve, so she didn't think it was. A faint buzzing was echoing in her ears. She assumed it was the technology from the Muggle neighbours as she threw her head under her pillow. Rose growled slightly into her baby blue pillow and sat back up with a scowl at whatever the noise was, as she found it was in her bedroom. Her eyes scanned over her desk in a corner where she studied, over a large pile of assorted stuffed animals, and over a smaller stack of half-read books, some of which were entitled, So You Want to Be the Best? 101 Easy and Impressive Spells to Stun Your Friends, Magic for Morons, and How to Cope. She tried to step out of bed in the dark to light her candle, but her foot became captured in her bedsheet, causing her to fall head first onto her board game, Pirates and Voyagers. Well, the empty box anyway, as she never could keep up with the pieces. her hand caught onto her Belinda Boxy doll's vanity that she never could give away because of sentiment. The vanity struck an idea into Rose's head as to the source of the noise. The hand mirror! Her Uncle Harry had given both Rose and Al 2 identical magic hand mirrors last Christmas. They worked similarly to Muggle Video Call, though Rose had never tried it. They'd buzz and become hot when one would try to get in touch with the other, and when you would swipe your hand across the mirror's face, it would ripple, and if answered right away, the other person's face would appear on the glass. She and her cousin were gifted these hand mirrors because her dad, Ron, and Al's mom, Ginny, who happened to be siblings, were often complaining about how the delivery owls, which acted as wizard post, were never around when they needed them for something important. Like Ron needing to send out order forms to his brother, George, for the joke shop, or Ginny needing to turn in her Quidditch article to be ready to be published in the morning's paper. Rose and Al were always sending them out with letters to each other, though they lived but a couple miles apart. The letters became so frequent that Harry had to figure out a solution for them to communicate without always using the delivery owls, and for his best mate and wife to stop whining. So, he bought 2 ordinary hand mirrors from a Muggle thrift store, used spells on them to make them two-way, and gifted them to Al and Rose. It had been a lot easier and faster to talk, and they were no longer having to duck across the kitchen table so not to be spotted and questioned about the location of the family's birds. Rose untethered her leg from a cotton blanket and stood in the middle of her room, trying to remember where she had last left the thing. The sound carried her to her dresser, also where the candle resided. She struck a match and lit the stub that she had left. Something tickled her elbow when she looked down to where it resided. Under her sleeve was an odd reflection of light. The mirror! Rose snatched the silver handle in her grasp and swiped her hand across the face. She jumped into bed and waited crisscross applesauce for the bright green light to subside and for Al's face to appear. Al greatly resembled his father. He had a slightly square jaw, and hair that was usually black and untamable, but incredibly soft. Perfect for tying in bows, as Rose had done to him until she was 8. He had inherited his father's bright green eyes and dark lashes. Albus appeared on her mirror leaning against his 3-panel window atop his ledge. He wore a white t-shirt and confessed a face of great distress rather than his usual bright and friendly expression. He had been distraught for the past 3 weeks. The 3 weeks since their visit to Diagon Alley, and the prospect of school, leaving home, and the sorting finally became reality rather than an amused fantasy. Albus was also 11, and would be starting at Hogwarts with Rose tomorrow. Rose readied herself for the conversation that had been rehearsed one-sided in the mirror every night, through a mouthful of foam as she brushed her teeth. He had been calling her every evening to discuss his worries, and perhaps this wouldn't be an issue if she was frightened too, but no matter what she said, he held it like water in his hands. She had been asked more than one occasion by her brother why she was talking to herself more often. She would confess angrily that she was talking to Al, as though her brother should be able to see their cousin at the breakfast table with them. Hugo had decided that she was a bit loony, but she had her bit down, though she knew Albus wouldn't listen.
"Hey, Rosie,"
said Albus, in a little more than a whisper.
"Al, it's 1 in the morning."
Rose stated the obvious, as she had an annoying habit of doing.
"Like you're really asleep,"
he replied, knowing her to be a night owl like himself.
"What's wrong?"
she asked, though she already knew.
"I'm gonna be put in Slytherin, I know it."
Rose sighed. What little hope that this would be the call to announce peace with school and would be spent on their bellies talking for hours about what they're excited about, sparked and went out. Slytherin was the house at Hogwarts that had produced more dark wizards than any other and had a very bad reputation. It was the house that nearly all the villains from their bedtime and war stories had resided. It was the house that homed the conniving Malfoy family, the lunatic Lestranges, the demented Drurys, and Voldemort himself. Somehow, Albus had been struck with the fear and unlikely idea that he would be sorted into Slytherin. Rose wasn't going to point fingers, but it was James. James loved to tease his brother, and loved arguing almost as much. Rose thought the idea of Slytherin was ludicrous. Albus was one of the kindest people she knew. And, of course, there are kind Slytherins, more now than there were during the reign of Voldemort, but Rose did not see the Serpent House in her cousin at all.
"Ow,"
said Rose wearily, but with no less compassion.
"I know I've said it before, but I'm sure of it. I have this terrible feeling, Rosie. I really do."
His shoulders were arched to neighbor his head, and his green eyes were wide with waiting fear. Rose had tried and tried to assure him that the sorting did not matter that much, though she didn't believe that. It was one of the most important events in a wizard's life. She had argued that Slytherin wasn't all bad and had changed since the end of Voldemort, and that whatever house he was in would not matter in the slightest to her or the rest of the family, who would all still see him the way he is. with the exception of James. Nothing that she said ever seemed to help. Rosie knew that what he really wanted was for her to tell him that he was for sure going to be a Gryffindor like his brother, but she, of course, wouldn't do that. Rose had no doubt that he would be placed in Gryffindor House, being so like his father who was a born-bred Gryffindor, but she also wasn't going to predict something that was not set in stone, at least not something as important as this.
Aren't you afraid, Rose?
Al asked quietly.
No, I'm not.
Rose replied candidly.
I'm confident on which house I'll be put in, and I'm also comfortable with wherever I'm placed. There are certain aspects of each Hogwarts house that I like.
Not Slytherin.
Al mumbled with a nervous glance to his feet. Rose closed her eyes and ready to begin again.
Slytherin is a house home to some of the most successful entrepreneurs. They are resourceful and often brilliant in their mind and ideas. They can accomplish anything when they put their mind to it and are respected individuals at school if they decide they want respect.
She said this in a tone that was flat and rehearsed, with her eyes closed, trying to remember what all she had said last time.
I just don't understand how you're not even a bit nervous.
He said, slightly embarrassed, as he felt like the scaredy cat next to his female cousin.
I'm just not.
She shrugged.
I thought I would be, but I'm only excited.
Al did not reply, and due to the low light, she was unable to make out his expression.
Al, you need to stop worrying about the sorting.
But what if I am put in Slytherin?
So what? You need to be placed wherever you do best.
So if I get put in Slytherin, it means I do best at being evil?
Al, you're being ridiculous. Not all Slytherins are bad, you know. You're named after one.
Rosie, you need to help me.
How can I help?
I don't know.
Al started to become frantic, and his voice got higher like it always did whenever he was scared.
You always have the answer. You're not about to say you don't know.
Albus, lower your voice. I don't want us to get restricted again. And I don't know.
The words tasted bad in her mouth. She hated not knowing.
Everything the Sorting Hat will judge you on is all in your head. I can't change what's in your head.
There was another pause.
Al, no matter what happens, I'll be right by your side. Even if you are a Slytherin, I know you, and I know you're not bad. You're not a bad person, Al.
She finished. Still, more silence followed.
Have you talked to Harry about it?
No.
Are you going to?
I'm thinking about doing it tomorrow.
I don't know why you're so worried about asking him,
said Rose, leaning against her cedar headboard.
He is your dad.
I don't want him to think I'm weak.
Al replied hurriedly. Rose sat up again. This was something that he had not confessed during their past discussions.
Al, he's your dad. He's not going to think you are weak. And being afraid doesn't make you weak either. Your parents are supposed to mentor you, to help you through these things and not judge you for them.
Thanks, Rosie,
he said, but Rose could tell that her words had not done much to calm his anxiety.
Alright, Al, you should go to sleep, and I mean actually go to sleep. Don't lie awake in bed all hours of the night thinking. You'll fall asleep on the Hogwarts Express and I won't have anyone to talk to.
You'll have James.
James? What a great conversationalist he is. Doing all the talking more like. Won't let me get a word in.
That's what he says about you. Good night.
The hand mirror went blank, meaning that Al had double-tapped the glass and was finished. She understood why he was afraid, and was slightly off-put by her unexplained calm. She should be terrified too. Rose slid her feet under her covers and laid down her matted red-haired head onto her pillow, and fell almost instantly to sleep. Though her slumber was disturbed when she awoke with a start later in the night. She had dreamed that she was falling from a great height and woke right before she hit the ground. She looked at her digital watch that her grandfather had given her, and saw that she had been asleep for 3 minutes. She lay back on her pillow in exasperation. She hated these helpless, sleepless nights. What had she forgotten? Her lack of sleep was usually because she had neglected to do something. She thought. Her uniform was on her dresser. Yes. Her trunk lay at the bottom of her bed. Had she packed her potion vials? Yes. And her cauldron, and all of her school books that she had already read, her empty wand box and her telescope? She had a broomstick but wasn't going to pack one due to the first-year rule prohibiting them to bring their own broomstick because of 2 stupid first-years sneaking out of the castle with theirs and breaking a couple of ribs somewhere in 1981. She had a bag of toiletries and pajamas, of hairpins and socks locked in her trunk, thanks to her dad for adding expansion spell to her trunk, allowing it to hold such a large variety of items, though being just as heavy. Maybe she was forgetting money for the train ride. Rose sat up quickly. The train ride! She had forgotten her travel bag! Rose swung the covers from her body and bothered not to relight her candle as she had forgotten to extinguish it 3 minutes ago.
Let's see.
She always packed a travel bag of random stuff to keep her occupied in case she got bored on a trip. She had forgotten one time and had to travel all the way to Wales in a muggle car with nothing to do but listen to James talk and pick on Albus. The vehicle had been pulled to the side of the busy interstate so Hermione and Ginny could fight Rose and James apart as they were trying to scratch each other's eyes from their skull. It was not a pleasant trip. Due to the fight inside the vehicle and the horn that Ginny kept kicking as she jumped over the seat, a Muggle police officer had pulled beside them where a few awkward questions were asked, including why they were dressed in robes, the reason they had 2 owls in the car, what concoction were in the vials from the trunk, and if they had been drinking. Rose had been moved to the Percy Weasley's vehicle, which she wouldn't have minded because her cousin Molly's card tricks and Lucy's princess stories, but she wasn't able to hear them over her Uncle Percy's excited babble about work and an upcoming promotion he expected from assistant manager of magical transportation to head. Her Aunt Audrey shared sweets, though Rose desperately wished that she had not attacked James, otherwise she would still be sharing a car with Albus. Rose searched the room and, though she could not draw well, took a sketchbook and a few pens from under her desk and placed them into a satchel. She got a book of short stories, a bouncy orb that changed glowing colours to play with when it gets dark, a sneakoscope, a small flying model broomstick — she loved Quidditch, a wizard sport played on broomsticks. She also packed a book called Quidditch Through the Ages, and one called Flying with the Cannons, that her dad had given her but she had never read. She stepped back and looked around the room to make sure that she had not missed anything, and got back into bed. It was a long while before she fell asleep again. She could hardly suppress her excitement now. It was something like trying to fall asleep on Christmas Eve. Rose woke the next morning to her mother's voice. Hermione had poked her head into Rose's bedroom and was calling her in a frantic whisper.
Rosie, oh Rose, wake up. We only have 2 hours until we have to leave. Oh, I accidentally slept in too. Come on downstairs after you get dressed, sweetheart.
It was just like her mom to wake her up 2 hours before her departure. It was like her dad to wake her up 2 minutes after because he had slept in too. Rose yawned and stretched, feeling her bones crack in a series of places. She made sure that there was no goo in the corners of her eyes and stepped out of bed clumsily, nearly tripping. She took her Hogwarts robes from her dresser and pulled on her socks, skirt, white shirt, grey vest, black tie, and black robes. She took a small Hogwarts pin from her bedside drawer and pinned it to her tie. She knew that she would get looks heading to platform 9 3/4, but she was too excited to wait. They were taking the Muggle entrance into the station, King's Cross, and usually had to dress in Muggle clothes, otherwise people would look at them oddly. Rose stood in front of the mirror and gave a quick twirl in her robes. The black robe, which fell to her lower calf just below the end of her grey socks, billowed around her legs. She loved it. She loved everything about the uniform, from the loose, long sleeves to the button that pulled the robe together, from the knee-length skirt to the wrinkle-free collar of her white button-up, shouldering her grey tie, that she had learned to tie just the night before and was exceptionally proud of, though being very square. It would look better if it had the Gryffindor crest on the left breast, though. At the moment, it was the Hogwarts crest. 4 squares and 4 corners interrupted by a white patch in the middle with a black letter H. The crest was embroidered with a gold trim and detail, while the first square, red with a lion, met the second, green, holding a coiled serpent. Below was yellow with a badger, beside blue with a bronze eagle. She had a sudden jolt of excitement looking at her new uniform, and did a silly little jig. She sniggered slightly in spite of herself because she was being ridiculous, and stood straight again, took a deep breath, and hurried down the stairs. She arrived at the bottom and had to run back up because she had forgotten her shoes and travel case. Rose found her father sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee with more cream and sugar in it than actual coffee. The home was quiet, quaint, and modest. They could afford a larger house, of course, with both parents having stable jobs, but only being a family of 4, they found that a smaller house would feel quite comfortable. Ron disagreed with Hermione on this theory, though. He had been raised in a large family with no money, and was always very cramped. Hermione was stern, though. She had to be, otherwise Ron would get what he wanted, in a power parachute or a mansion, to reconstruct the yard to be a Quidditch field, or to buy out their neighbour's property and kick them out. They lived in almost always a neighbourhood, but a Muggle family with 4 children somehow slipped into the next house, as Muggle as can be with yellow walls and a white picket fence. Hermione was pretty sure that they had inherited it from a Squib relative who had passed away long ago. A Squib was a Muggle born to magic parents but had no magic themselves. The neighbourhood assumed that the Squib had never told anyone that he or she was born to a magic family. Squibs are usually ashamed of the matter of having no magic. The neighbours were always having to put memory charms in this poor family because they or the child had been immature in letting magic slip. Ron even had to put a charm in the backyard so if the Muggle family looked up while the Weasleys were flying on brooms, they would only see 2 overly large birds. But Rose's house was big enough to be comfortable, small enough for a family of 4, and was in a very good location with a large backyard and trees surrounding the area, blocking it from most view. A garden was in the backyard and flowers were planted along the side of the house. A neat metal fence lined their property and 2 willow trees grew beside it. Rose often took to reading under those willow trees. She loved the smell and the way the wind danced with the vines. Rose took a seat beside her father, and her mom set out a plate with an omelette in front of her. It smelled good. Hermione had added peppers this time, it seemed. Rose could remember whenever she was younger, and her mom was a dreadful cook, so her father had to do most of it, though not being great himself. Ron insisted on ordering food all the time, but her mom, being so determined, had refused and remade meals every night. Burnt bread and dried chewy ham was the best dinner she could make for a while, one of the reasons they ate at the Potters so often.
So Rosie,
Said Ron, his eyes still scanning the newspaper in his hand.
you gonna try out for the Gryffindor Quidditch team this year?
Of course I'm going to try.
Swallow Rose.
Reminded Hermione with a raised eyebrow and a spatula in her hand. Rose swallowed.
Yeah, I'm going to try out, but I'm kind of nervous about it.
She accidentally confessed.
I mean,
She tried.
first years rarely make the house teams. A lot more than they used to, sure, but still not often. James even waited until second year to try out, and he's obsessed with Quidditch to the point it's scary.
You shouldn't be nervous. You're one of the best players your age I've seen. Better than James, I think, but don't ever mention that to him. Not enough practice. Tell you what, I'll finish this,
He raised the Daily Prophet he had been reading.
and we'll go outside and practice.
Ron, it rained last night, and it's all muddy, and she's in her new uniform.
Ron looked back at his daughter.
Hold on.
Rose said, and she ran back upstairs. It didn't take long for her to remove her robes, shoes, and to slip her feet into a pair of purple overly large rain boots and arrive back at the kitchen table.
How's this?
She asked, giving a twirl, which made the rubber boots squeak against the wood flooring. Ron looked at her boots and skirt and chuckled slightly. Hermione was looking at her white blouse.
Alright, come on.
He said, putting a piece of toast in his mouth, and he started outside with his daughter. Rose could hear her mom give a half-amused, half-exasperated snort as they closed the side door behind them. Ron and Rose began at the greenhouses to fetch their brooms. Their brooms were the only thing worth visiting the greenhouses for. They did not plant. This building was used mostly to contain the more conspicuous magical items that Hermione did not want in the house, but couldn't let the Muggle family see. The outside walls were jinxed to give the illusion of beautiful flowers and vegetables growing on the inside. Rose grabbed her Nimbus 2001. It was a pretty old model, but she had no reason to ask for a new one. It still worked well. Her father grabbed his old firebolts and they continued to the backyard.
So, what position do you want to play?
Asked Ron, checking for rain in the palm of his hand.
A beater?
Are you sure you don't want to be keeper? That's a good one.
Nah, I want to be a beater.
She said, while yanking her foot from the squelching mud.
Alright. Well, I don't think we should get the bludgers out today. I don't want you taking a chance of going to your first day of school with a broken nose. How about Chaser?
Quidditch was a wizard sport played on broomsticks. There were 4 balls, 7 players on a team, and 3 goalposts on either side of the pitch. In these 7 players, there were 3 chasers, 2 beaters, 1 keeper, and 1 seeker. The chasers would take the largest ball, the quaffle, and try to get it through one of the other team's goal hoops. The beater would use clubs to hit the 2 bludgers away from their own team and at the opposing team's players. Bludgers were heavy balls whose job it was to hit as many players as they could off their brooms. The keeper would guard the goalpost and prevent the other team from scoring. It was the seeker's job to catch the last ball called a snitch. The snitch was a tiny golden ball that would zigzag around the pitch and was exceptionally tricky to catch. Once the snitch is caught, the game is over. 10 points to every goal scored and 150 points to the team that catches the snitch. Whichever team has the most points at the end of the game wins. In another 10 minutes, she had pulled her little brother, Hugo, away from his omelet and got him to hover in front of the one single goalpost that her dad had mounted. And her mom took to watching them with a cup of tea from the balcony. It was a good morning despite the grey weather. She and her dad passed the quaffle back and forth and into the goal half the time, and the other half Hugo would block it. He had become very good, especially with him being so small. Again and again they passed and they scored and they missed and they laughed for what felt like almost an hour, until they saw yellow fireworks above and looked to the balcony. Hermione was waving at them while frantically shouting that they had 15 minutes before they had to leave. The family all spread to the ground and ran toward the house, splattering cold mud all over their own legs. Rose fell out of both of her boots, which remained stuck in the mud, and had to drag her little brother, who was having a lot of difficulty. Her socks were now wet and muddy and squelched with every step. There was no worse feeling. Had it really been over an hour and a half?
Scourgify, Scourgify, Scourgify!
Hermione shouted, while blasting charms at their feet to rid their legs and shoes of mud. The wet squelching left Rose's socks, and she suddenly did not feel so disgusting. She ran back into her room, and pulled on her robes and shoes, and shuffled back downstairs. Rose jumped into the bathroom where Hugo was brushing his teeth. Hugo was only a year younger than her, but acted as though she was his little sister. He had curly red hair and freckles along his nose, his face was round like his mother's, and he was her spitting image despite having his father's hair, eyes, and accent. Rose snatched a toothbrush and squeezed beside her brother. Hugo spit into the sink and dropped his toothbrush.
I'll just wait,
he huffed, hating the feeling of being cramped. Rose was watching her reflection as it stroked her teeth vigorously with the bristles of her sudsy brush. She hoped she wouldn't look too out of place at Hogwarts. Her hair was vivid and her freckles were extremely perceptible. Despite her small flaws, Rose didn't dislike her appearance. She wasn't a fan of the tiny gap between her two front teeth, nor did she like her sturdy and undainty figure. But she did mind her eyes. In fact, she said she quite liked them, though they weren't dazzling blue with long, thick eyelashes as the girls in nearly every storybook and song seemed to have. She had her mother's eyes. They were round and chocolatey brown and bright, always eager as her Aunt Audrey had stated when first seeing Rose as a babe, and often referred to her as little eager eyes. Rose had tried to brush her hair but did not feel keen to battle the knots and attempted to sneak her hat, but Hermione wouldn't allow it. She tied Rose's hair into a knot in the back of her head, with much assistance from hairpins to hold every wandering piece of frizz and curl. Ron used a hovering charm to get her trunk into the car, as he wasn't planning to fight with a massively heavy object. The family jumped into the ugly yellow vehicle with a bumper sticker that read, "Peace bro, no anger yo." The vehicle was cheap, and they found that they were pulled over much less. Ron jumped into the driver's seat, made sure that they were all accounted for, started the engine, and took off.